Kerri, it's great to see you today. Thanks so much for taking a little bit of time with me to be on the podcast and talk about something that's really important, but a little what's the right word I'm looking for? It's dense, it's heavy, and
Yeah.
I don't always like to kick off the first podcast of the new year talking about such a heavy topic, but I don't think we have a lot of choice this year. Everything we're going to talk about is going to end up being a little heavy. So anyway, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
I am glad to be with you. This is a really important topic, and I tell folks all the time, I am not excited to have to talk about it, but I am glad that you were interested.
Yeah, so we're so glad that you're willing to talk about something and do the research to have an understanding of all of this. And so the topic's Christian nationalism. But before we jump in, why don't you give the listeners a little bit of a background of yourself?
Sure. I am a Christian clergy. I'm ordained in the United Church of Christ. I have been a pastor and a nonprofit executive, and now I am both as the executive director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches. I've been in this role for about 8 years, and I get to connect with faith-based organizations all around the state. And really, what we do is help network and make sense of some of the thorniest issues facing all of us.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. So, our work can be a little bit heavy and daunting as well as this topic. So, you and I talking about Christian nationalism, this is just another day at the office, but just want to prepare people that we're going to talk about something that is vitally important for everything that we're doing right now. It's so relevant to what we're experiencing in our world, and it's got some just really ugly roots, and it's grown into something in my mind very ugly and disgusting, and it's influencing and informing again a lot of what we're experiencing. So before we jump too much into what we're experiencing right now, could you, and this is a little tricky. I think I've tried it a few times before and maybe have come up empty, but could you try to give us a working definition of Christian nationalism in 2026?
Sure. I will I will give you the simplest definition I have, and then I will expand.
Perfect.
Okay. The simplest definition that I have is it's an ideology that wants to merge Christian identities and American identities, and it distorts both of them. So you end up having really bad Christianity and something that's not really patriotic. So it's an ugly mashup that is the worst of all of it.
And I think and here's the tricky thing about Christian nationalism is the two words that define it are both very positive words, right? We're not here to talk negatively about Christianity. You and I come
No.
from that tradition, so that we're not interested in that. We're not, you and I as Americans, we're not interested in bashing, nationalism or looking at it as an overtly horrible thing. But when you put these two things together in the way that they've been put together and what we're going to talk about today, it's frightening.
I've been at a big church conference where somebody went up to the microphone and said, I'm a Christian nationalist. And I'm like, we need to unpack that
Yes.
because I think what you're trying to say, it, I don't want to reinterpret somebody if they really believe that they are a Christian nationalist. If they are really a Christian nationalist, that's one thing. But I think what this person was trying to say is that they're a Christian and that they love their country.
Yes.
That is not being a Christian nationalist. That's a very different thing. It is okay to be a Christian who loves your country and maybe who wants to hold it accountable. But being a Christian nationalist is a different mashup, and that gets a whole lot more complicated, and that can set you up to build some idols that also can kind of get you in trouble with Jesus if you're a Jesus follower.
Yeah, and interesting that, and part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation is you did a wonderful session at Holy Wisdom Monastery just a couple weeks ago as we're recording this. And we were posting that. We were really promoting that because it was such a great event. And I knew you were going to be there, just doing exactly what we're doing on this podcast. And some of the comments that came back from a social media standpoint when we shared about it were obviously comments coming from people who were confused at just what those two words together meant. And so then I was like, it was a no-brainer that we have to keep this conversation going, and I wanted to get you on this show. So, all right, that's kind of the basic format. Now, build that out a little bit for us.
Sure. So when we talk about an ideology, you start thinking about not just thoughts and ideas, but a whole cultural framework. So you've got myths, you've got traditions, you've got symbols, you've got stories, like almost sacred stories, if you will, things that you kind of hold up that think about that mom and apple pie thing on steroids.
Hmm.
Whole value systems. Um, and there are a whole lot of assumptions that go with that. So you've got something you call nativism, right? We're the best, white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity. And I think the thing that gets at the ugliness is divine sanction for the way that power is used. So authoritarian control and militarism. It's a whole toxic soup. Now, any source you go to is going to use a slightly different assemblage of those words, but it's going to amount to the same thing. A really good website to go to for this is Christians Against Christian Nationalism.org. That comes from the American Baptist tradition, and they've assembled a wide range of resources that give you slightly varying definitions that amount to the same thing.
Yeah, that's a great website, a great organization that put it together. So thank you for that resource. Now, we could trace the roots of this as far back as we want to, I suppose. But when we think about Christian nationalism in our culture today, could you maybe give us a little bit of history of, maybe start where you want, but maybe the 80s, maybe the 90s, somewhere in there where we kind of have this new version of Christian nationalism that is what we're really coming up against currently.
Absolutely. So we think about the roots and foundations of Christian nationalism, and they go way back
Hmm.
past the founding of the United States. There's something called the doctrine of discovery.
Yes, yes. And
And
I would, if I were to go back, that's probably where
yep,
I would start. That's why I said maybe let's let's try not to
right,
go so far back. But yes.
right. So we can dig into that, and maybe that'll be an aside later on in our conversation.
Well, share since
But
we brought it up, share at least what that
okay.
represents. Yes.
So the doctrine of discovery comes to us courtesy of the 1500s, and what a lot of us learned about in history class is the age of the explorers.
Hmm.
And at that point in time, the church, the Catholic Church, um, assisted in this enterprise by issuing a decree that said basically any land that is quote unquote discovered is captured in the name of Christianity, and anybody who doesn't become Christian can either be forced to be made Christian or is not really a human being.
Hmm.
And their lands, their belongings, their persons are forfeit, and they can be led in quote perpetual servitude, I think was the language.
Hmm.
Which led to so many atrocities. It also became the foundation for transatlantic slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and depersoning millions of Black and brown people, generations of Black and brown people over time. Uh, really, really short version of a really long, ugly story. And I think that's a thing we need to remember is this is a generations long project that has built and built and built and gotten us to this day, to the current manifestation of white Christian nationalism.
Hmm.
Um, we also have something called Christian hegemony, the idea that it's much easier to be Christian in the United States than it is to practice any other faith. You- my symbols are all around, my holidays are privileged. Um, hey, you know, it's just easier to be a Christian. Um, then we have, if you want to go back to say the 50s, you've got something called civil religion. That's when we added under God to the Pledge of Allegiance and really doubled down on having the Pledge of Allegiance. One nation under God. We're not like those commies,
Hmm.
right? Um, and then we moved from civil religion. Hey, if you want to be a good American, aren't you going to join the nice tall steeple church in your town? To religious nationalism, where if you imagine them as two circles, religion and patriotism, they're getting closer and closer and closer and closer until they're almost overlapped. So, again, lightning speed overview.
Yes, yes. But it makes sense. And it is, I think, important to bring in doctrine of discovery because when you talk about the roots of that, you can still see the effects of that in what we're talking about today. And so it's interesting to me, and I'd be interested to get your take on this. It feels like we went through this stage, and you could maybe it was the Obama presidency, maybe it was gay marriage,
Mhm,
several things that kind of happened culturally in America in the
mhm,
past. We'll call it 2 decades. And I think a lot of us sat back and said, okay, we're finally experiencing progress. And then all of a sudden it's like we hit this wall. It's like we
mhm.
hit this wall that's trying to rip us back to to where we were what feels like years and years ago. And now we're seeing that today, with immigration, with ICE, with everything that's going on. And so I'm interested to hear, do you think what we're experiencing today, and in a lot of ways Christian nationalism, is a it's coming against this progress that our country seems to have been making, at least up till 8, 12 years ago?
I think I think backlash is a real thing. And this is part of a pattern of backlash that we have had to every progressive era in this country. You think about the major pushback there was to Reconstruction, violence and terror was the pushback
Hmm.
to Reconstruction. You had so many folks voting and getting property, and we had Black folks getting elected to office. And then, kabam, we had an age of terror where all of those gains were stripped back, and you got into the Jim Crow era, and you had people dying in lynchings. And then you had what folks thought was okay, we're moving forward. We had the hard won gains of the civil rights movement. Look at what we did. This country is moving forward again. And then you had another conservative moment, right?
Hmm.
Some folks in this country got fearful of what felt like equality. Wait, are those folks really equal to us? That's not right. I don't know if that's the way that should be. I'm going to push back. And so you had that pendulum shift again, the swing with President Obama's electoral success and his being in office. There were unprecedented levels of threats and racial statements being made, racist statements being made in corners of the internet. And all of that, again, backlash, all of that was on the upswing again. Um, and that got entangled into the political sphere. And then we have the birth of replacement theory. 2042 is anticipated to be the end of a white majority in the United States.
Hmm.
And so you have folks who build a conspiracy theory around this. And where there is a conspiracy theory, there has to be pushback against the conspiracy theory. So if there's a great big conspiracy to replace, quote unquote, us heritage Americans, then we must fight back. We have to have an easy answer to these demographic shifts. There's media segmentation now, huge media segmentation. People don't listen to the same things, watch the same things, read the same things. And so it's very easy to exist in your corner of the information and believe because you hear something entirely different. So they're evil, you're good. You're good, they're evil. And all of a sudden, we have made the other a horrific enemy who wants to eliminate us. Wow.
That's that's a lot, Carrie. That's a lot. And speaking to this, one of the most important things to a detrimental movement like this is creating a common enemy. And if you trace back to those spaces that you just took us to, and then now
Mm,
that we look at our current space that we're in right now, there has been a common enemy who has been has a narrative has been created about this common enemy in this situation, immigrants to our country. They're killing our neighbors, they're taking our jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you build up that narrative, and then you get
mhm.
the wrong power structure in place, and then you find yourself where we are. And unfortunately, like like all throughout history, you see people of faith standing on, in my opinion, what's tragically the wrong side of history.
Well, not only standing on the wrong side of history, but building on problematic eras of history
Yes.
to make what they're doing in the current day even more toxic. Some of the emblems that white Christian nationalists are using um, build not only on the Confederate era, right?
Hmm.
Confederate battle flags and things like that, folks know about. I don't think that's going to be a mystery to any of your listeners.
No.
Um, but also the Crusader cross.
Hmm.
So, what's called the Jerusalem cross or the Crusader cross is on a flag that is often used by white Christian nationalist um, adherents. It is also on tattoos by white Christian nationalist followers. The United States military's official social media accounts put out an image of a Marine's helmet with a patch that had that Crusader cross that was used to conquer the quote unquote Holy Land um, on the helmet of a Marine who was active in Operation Southern Spear, which is the operation that is active in the Caribbean right now, that is destroying boats
Hmm.
and attacking Venezuela. So, okay, we're attacking brown people, because we want to conquer Holy Land, because we believe it belongs to us, that it is our divinely sanctioned. The layers
Yes.
of belief systems involved in this
Wow.
get ever more problematic.
Yeah. And this is why this is why it's so important, especially as people of faith, to stand up against this and allow people to see that, there's a large conglomerate of people that use that same word to describe themselves, and also a large conglomerate of people who would say we're people of faith in whatever tradition that may be. And we see people standing against this, and we see it happening in large numbers. And it's so vital, I think, because so often in the media you're going to hear, this narrative or that narrative, and it's really important that we stand against this, and that as people of faith we identify ourselves as people of faith who do not adhere to this type of thinking in any way imaginable. So, which leads me really to the next the next question is, what do we do about all this?
I regularly hear from Christians, how do we tell people we're not that kind of church? Right?
Right,
How do
right.
how do we people know, let people know that we don't think about Jesus like that with muscles and guns and wrapped in the flag and things like
Hmm.
that. And I think it's really important to not just define ourselves as what we're against, but what we're building.
Hmm.
And I talk about the reality that we have to love people more than we hate empire.
Wow. That's
I'm going to say that
powerful.
again. Love people more than we hate empire. Empires are about the business of hates and enemies and building ourselves up on the basis of what is outside of us, right?
Hmm.
We are about our borders and enlarging our borders. And if you are a person of faith, it may be, I'm not going to speak for everyone here, but many of the people of faith and goodwill that I know understand themselves in the context of their relationships. I am because we are,
Hmm.
is the way some of my dearest friends define it. So, how do we understand our histories well enough to know what we're fighting against, but not spend all of our energies defining ourselves by that? How do we build? How do we tell more complex stories? How do we live in ways of joy and justice, connectedness, and generosity? How do we actually get involved in our communities in ways that aren't about domination, but are about connectedness?
Yeah, and it should be noted, and these are some other conversations I've had because, we're an interfaith organization. Both you and I are around people of wide varieties of faith traditions. And when I started kind of introducing, I mean, I wasn't introducing Christian nationalism. I was introducing conversations about Christian nationalism to our board and to other people in kind of the circles that I run in. And there, every once in a while, it wasn't the norm, but every once in a while, I'd get a pushback from somebody that did not identify as Christian, saying, "This isn't my battle. This is your battle." What would you say in response to that?
Ryan Kaler, I believe. Um, I'm trying to think. Let me see here if I have the title of his book on my desktop. Yes. His book is called Baptizing America. He says we all have a little bit of Christian nationalism in us.
Hmm.
Um, kind of like it's the water we swim in.
Yeah.
Even uh, like with racism, it's the water we swim in. You may not be a Christian, but it's all around you. it may not be your fight to lead the pushback on, but understand the ways in which it helps shape you in the world around you. So, yeah, Christian nationalist understandings, something like a fifth of us are ambassadors, or like, you know what, I really buy into this thing. I believe this is a Christian nation.
Hmm.
A whole bunch of us accommodate it. Some of us resist it a little bit more. And only about a fifth of us reject it out and out.
Hmm.
So, like, we've got a fifth of us that are like, yeah, I'm all in, and a fifth of us that are like, whoa, Nelly. That leaves three-fifths of us in the squishy middle.
Hmm.
That's a lot of folks.
Yes. And
That's
that's
a
why
lot of
it's,
folks saying, what should this country be in
yes.
relationship to Christianity and the, let's say, the height to which we should exalt our nation?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up because that even shows how important it is that we're having these conversations, not just on podcasts or at seminars, but also just around dinner tables with
Mhm.
people and our workplaces, because there's a lot of people who are confused about it. There's a lot of people who don't really know where they stand on it. And there's still a
Mhm.
lot of information that's out there that we can get in the hands of people that would help them make informed decisions about how they feel about it, and then can be part of the solution as our, as we move forward. And so, I appreciate you sharing those statistics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for folks to recognize none of us are going to solve the problem alone,
Yeah.
right? But we have to dive in somewhere, and that's getting informed ourselves. That's talking about it with folks we know, even if it feels a little uncomfortable and maybe even icky, and doing something that's going to change the status quo, which is going to mean connecting and stretching ourselves.
Perfect. Well, Kerri, thank you so much for taking some time. We could keep going. I know we could, but let's end it there so we have enough for, I think that's enough for all of us to digest and really consider and think about. And then we'll keep this conversation going in many different ways into the future. But thank you so much for your time. You know how much I appreciate you and appreciate all the work that you do.
I am glad to chat. Thanks so much for the invitation.